welcome to the channel. This channel has the goal of trying to bring the esoteric field of international relations to the general public. At a time when most social sciences are being brought to the forefront of public discussion, international relations as a whole is on the decline, becoming simply a subfield of political science when it is so much more than that. In democracies, that which is not discussed gets neglected, and neglecting international relations has historically ended catastrophically, as we'll discuss in future installments. In this channel, I'll try to stick close to the actual literature, reviewing books and articles in a distilled manner when trying to introduce topics rather than generalizing various topics and glossing over the debates in a not useful manner. In addition, I'll cover history, current events, diplomacy, and internal politics of nations. I'll hopefully begin having interviews with those people who've had the largest influence on me or I find most interesting. I'll also discuss my personal projects and papers, as it is simply what I know best and find to be most important. So who am I? My name is James Renicky. I'm graduating with a bachelor's degree from Georgia Tech in International Affairs and Chinese as a third year this spring, after my master's here at International Security this summer. I've lived in China the past 2 summers. This summer I'll be exploring security concerns in various East Asian countries before living a year in Taiwan, getting my Chinese fully up to speed. Although I am young, I have a rather strong resume and a rather humble background. I focus on institutional change and development, primarily studying liberal totalitarian institutions, military affairs, Chinese politics, Taiwanese security, and data science. I tentatively am making a shift towards studying security sector reform once I start my master's. I try to read 2 to 6 hours a day, so my studies are going quite well. This general endeavor here is obviously going to cut into that, but I want to start this before possibly getting security clearance and have bureaucratic opposition to starting this. Another motive for this channel is to get around the bureaucratic monster that is the social science journals, and instead publish what I like, without censorship, through this channel on my personal website with my articles, link in the description. I'll still go through the traditional avenues for publishing books I have planned, however. So, what exactly is international relations? Humans have developed large institutions/organizations called the state. A state is a body that centralizes power from and controls a large group of people. This is distinct from a nation that is a group of people with a shared identity, whether it be ethno-nationalism, a patriotic national identity like that of the US and UK, a religious national identity, and so on. Most commonly, we have nation-states, where a nation of people form their own state. However, there are nations like the Kurd or the Sikhs that lack a state, and multinational states like the USSR and China. Generally, one nation, one state is the most efficient form. International relations fundamentally deals with how these states interact. However, some argue that, in order to understand how states interact, one must account for internal state actors, interstate actors, and non-state actors. Others like to simplify the model to just states. Of course, states do not always exist. International relations, abbreviated IR, has its own unique perspective when it comes to history. It, of course, focuses mainly on European history, because their history largely determined the world stage. I personally find the time between 400 BC and 1400 AD to be incredibly useful knowledge. I'll make the case for that in a later installment. However, early modern European state building did not really start until after 1400. This is when the secular institutions began becoming powerful, and we begin seeing what is called an international system of states. The international system is essentially a closed system of status quo. This used to be regional arrangements. Nowadays, the international system encompasses the world. There have been many throughout history as the balance of power is constantly changing. A watershed moment in history was the Westphalian Treaty of 1648 that established the current rules of state interaction, namely the principle of popular sovereignty. Another watershed moment was the British successfully leading the defeat of Napoleon's attempt to unify all of Europe. We will examine how close Napoleon came to this later. But this event secured the liberal future of Europe, something that was not at all for certain and would be challenged many more times after. Another important event was the rise of the Bismarck system of balance of power between 1870 and 1890, where Bismarck brilliantly brought peace and prosperity to Europe under his wise and steady hand. In 1890, he was fired by the imperial meaning expansionist and on the warpath, Kaiser Wilhelm II, who through many dumb and provocative decisions started World War I. World War I was completely started by the Germans. It's a popular myth to think otherwise that we'll examine later. The Allied victor in World War I once again secured liberal institutions in Europe, the same with World War II. After World War II, we see the rise of the West and the liberal international order, secured after the fall of the USSR. Nowadays, China, Russia, and members of the Global South are trying to overthrow this order and make the world safe for dictators. That is generally the relevant history one needs to know for international relations, and I'll be calling upon it and expanding upon it when explaining topics. There will be specific videos in the future going over books that explain the history and arguments about it. With that background history, many IR theorists have tried to systematize and explain IR. The goals are generally to explain past behavior. Once one can explain past behavior, one tries to predict future behavior of other countries. Once one can do that, one can develop a strategy for one's own country. These three parts of theory are generally blurred together, as IR theory is not a terribly philosophic endeavor, unfortunately, as we will see. It generally relies on rationalistic, a priori assumptions that have not been pulled from the bodies of social science or philosophy and literature as much as it should. Lastly for this video, a brief overview of topics on IR, although this certainly is not a complete list. There's what's called great power competition. This is a study of how hegemonic powers or rising powers compete for dominance. Hegemonic powers are those in the international system that are able to dictate to others the rules by which they are to interact. Hegemonic powers are those in an international system that are able to dictate to other states the rules by which they are to interact with each other. Many view the Cold War as great power competition between the US and USSR. I argue against this view in one of my papers I'll introduce in a different video. The idea of hegemonic competition is fundamentally tied to the dominant IR theory of realism that will be the topic of the next released video. Another topic is arms control and proliferation. Arms control focuses on stopping arms buildup in countries that could accidentally lead to war through fear and competition to build up larger supplies of arms. Proliferation stops the spread of specific arms technologies like nuclear missile technology to other countries. For example, leftists in the US gave Stalin the technology to make nukes, while the Chinese stole the technology when the USSR did not give them the technology because Mao stated he'd be willing to sacrifice all the Chinese people to destroy the US. This is a failure of proliferation. Nowadays, the main proliferation challenge is not let Iran, the main state funder of terrorism, get the bomb. Both Russia and China have a long history of dealing with Islamic terrorism, so they will not help out Iran. Some think Russia, however, must have given the North Koreans new technology in exchange for having North Korean troops help recently with their invasion of Ukraine. Another topic is the study of international institutions and the liberal international order. Some notable institutions are NATO, the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, and the regional trade structures. Many scholars debate the effectiveness of international and global institutions and governance, whether we should pursue them or whether they infringe upon our sovereignty and hurt liberalism. One potent question is whether the peace among Western nations since World War II is due in part to these global institutions. If it is, then why did the League of Nations and institutions like it from the Bismarck era fail so epically? International relations is the branch of social science that deals with military affairs and history, C4, command, control, communications, and intelligence, ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and recon, military-industry relations, and strategy. My school, Georgia Tech, in particular, deals with the convergence of technological innovation, data, and military affairs. People study various things ranging from how to command the military, how to make sure civilians maintain control over it, the future warfare, how to use military power as a tool of policy, and so on. One last topic IR covers is the international political economy. This is a convergence of the fields of IR and economics. Political economy covers how the institutions within a state affect their economies. International political economy knows how international institutions affect trade, development of the global south, bargaining between states, the relationship between economics and conflict, and how to maintain the global system of trade from mercantilist imperial threats. For instance, does the WTO systematically side against the US? How can we help the global south modernize without creating a new China by accident? It's topics like these that got me into IR, and I hope to play a part in creating discussion of them among the general public.